Although the year has just started, quite a few things have happened in the world of tennis, from the controversial banning of Novak Djokovic by Australia to the eventual victory of Rafael Nadal at the Australian Open. But with the first Grand Slam now out of the way, we turn our eyes to player reactions. So what are the most intense on-court explosions? And which players were behind them? For all this and more, stay tuned. First and foremost, we have to talk about the man of the moment. As much as we love Rafa, he had a bit of a tantrum a few years back when faced by a longtime rival, Tomáš Berdych of the Czech Republic. For those of you who don't know, both Nadal and Berdych have a pretty stiff history with one another, with some referring to their rivalry as one of the biggest in tennis history. Suffice to say, fans and critics alike were looking forward to the match, and it didn't take long for things to boil over. After a controversial ruling by the umpire in Nadal's favor, Berdych looked like he was about to pop, but to the surprise of the tennis community, he had kept his composure and asked to challenge the call. Using Hawkeye technology, the umpire was then able to see the error in his ways, which essentially caused him to overturn his previous decision. In fact, the umpire went even further by awarding the point to Berdych instead of asking for the point to be replayed. And it goes without saying, but Nadal was less than happy with the call. He had returned the ball, after all, with the awardance of a point only being allowable if the shot was deemed non-returnable, which it wasn't. Knowing full well that he was in the right, Nadal went on to approach the umpire in true McEnroe fashion. It's about the only time Rafa fans have seen their hero lose his cool on the court, but it's definitely one to remember. And then we have that infamous moment between Kohlschreiber and Kubek. It might have been a bit before your time, but Daniel Kelleher was well known to the previous generation for the amount of disputes he had per match. Not only would he throw a tantrum whenever things refused to go his way, he would also often resort to violence, which found him receiving more match suspensions than John McEnroe and Serena Williams combined. He was also more than willing to smash a few rackets along the way, which is something that was looked down on even worse in the past. The moment that has him making this list took place in 2010 though, which saw him instigating a blow-up from his opponent, Stefan Kubik. After throwing various emotional jabs at his Austrian opponent, he ended up knocking Kubik's racket from his hands. He then went to sit down and drink water as if nothing had happened between them. But Kubik wasn't very quick to forgive. After being tormented by Kelleher for the majority of the match, he finally lost his cool, and to the surprise of the crowd, he walked right up to Kelleher and grabbed him by the neck in a rather threatening manner. Surprisingly enough, it was Kelleher who was then escorted from the court, with the crowd jeering at him while applauding the irrational action of Kubik. Suffice to say, the crowd were more than happy to see Kelleher finally get what he deserved, and although we don't condone violence, we can see why. But that's nothing compared to when Martina Hingis took on the French. It all took place at the final of the 1999 French Open, which saw Hingis up against the world-renowned Steffi Graf. Surprisingly enough, Hingis found herself in control of the game quite early, with a set and break already in her favor. But after a call was made against her, she decided to dispute it in a rather aggressive fashion. She crossed the net and went on to argue with the umpire, which resulted in her being handed a code violation. What's worse is that the crowd didn't agree with the way she had handled things, and just like that, they began to act out. She faced a few jeers, but instead of apologizing for her conduct and moving on, she let her anger get the best of her. She taunted the crowd by serving underhand twice and then leaving the court for a bathroom break mid-set. Suffice to say, the French men and women who had paid to be a part of this experience didn't like where the match was going. The umpire even had to calm the crowd down at one point, as their jeering against Hingis was deemed to be far too distracting. In the end, it was the crowd that won though, causing Hingis to lose her cool and eventually be defeated by Steffi Graf. It's a cautionary tale for the professional players that come after Hingis. Don't do anything to get the crowd riled up, as they can easily ruin your game. Another memorable reaction was from Juan Ignacio Schella of Argentina, and it took place when El Flaco was facing off against the infamous Leighton Hewitt. For those of you who don't know, Hewitt was one of the baddest boys of tennis, and we mean that in the worst way possible. He was known for being one of the biggest instigators on the court, and on quite a few occasions hit out against the umpire and his fellow opponents. That being said, it was Schella this time around who had a blow up as a result of Hewitt, who had been ragging on him all game. After arrogantly celebrating a point win for the last time that game, Schella felt disrespected by the conduct of Hewitt, especially since the point win was the result of Schella making an unforced error, and as frustrating as it must have been for the Argentine, nobody really expected what came next. Schella went on to complete his service by serving the ball directly at Hewitt, but after being warned for irregular conduct, he continued on as if nothing had happened. And then, in the closing moments of the match, which usually sees the opponents come together to shake hands, Schella instead chose to spit at Hewitt. In his own words, he felt like Hewitt deserved this disrespect because of the insane amount of disrespect Hewitt had shown him and others across his lucrative career. You have to be the player that takes the high road in these situations though, and even before COVID, spitting wasn't cool. And then we have John McEnroe in that 1982 exhibition match in Chicago. According to the headlines, McEnroe was set to take on Jimmy Connors, who he had been bad-mouthing all year, showing that there was no love to be lost between the two of them. And although there was nothing to really lose at this exhibition match, it quickly became clear that the game meant a lot more to the two of them than anyone could have expected. The Americans were dead set on destroying one another, with the crowd becoming heavily invested in the match after the intensity that both McEnroe and Connors went on to display. But after a couple of back-and-forth jabs between the professionals, Connors finally decided that enough was enough. He went on to cross the net and confront McEnroe face-to-face, showing that he was less unafraid of what might happen to him, which McEnroe had suggested in the past. To the surprise of fans, though, McEnroe looked on to Connors with a calmness we had never seen from the bad boy of tennis before, and although he pushed Connors away, he did so with no malice or anger. Funny enough, this action led to Connors being designated as the crazy one, and although he went on to win the exhibition match in 5 sets after around 5 hours of tennis, there's no doubt that he came off as the loser of the game. No wonder he was so mad at McEnroe, who had clearly planned this from the start. Last but not least, we have Serena Williams at the 2018 US Open, and this is by far one of the most famous examples of tennis legends losing their cool in the modern era. Although things were looking pretty good for Serena when facing off against Naomi Osaka in the 2018 US Open final, the umpire gave her a citation for receiving coaching from her coach in the crowd, and it was at this moment that things started to fall apart for the former champion. After yelling at the umpire for seeing something that was apparently not there, the crowd went on to boo her for not just carrying on with the game. She later went on to accuse the umpire of being a thief for stealing a point from her, which resulted in another violation. Finally, she brought up the sexism card, stating that men who did the same were never punished for their conduct. But in the end, Osaka outplayed Serena straight up, winning the US Open to the joy of the crowd. And there you have it, some of the greatest and most intense on-court reactions from tennis professionals across the years. What do you think about tennis players losing their cool on the court? And how do you think these players should be punished? Feel free to let us know in the comment section down below.